A Threnody for Kolchev by Darius Hinks. In the Warhammer sanatorium, 2 miles south of Zeradrus city on Holy Terror, Dr. Warhammer sprawled at the end of a long table, bathed in blues and golds. Terror's eternal dusk was raining down through a stained glass window, and he looked like a saint in repose, basking in holy radiance. The light flashed over the augmetics that covered one side of his face and blazed in the absurd periwig that crowned his head. He wore a military-style uniform, braided and tasseled and tight enough to show off his powerful, bloated physique. He looked like an athlete gone to seed and dressed for dinner. He was handsome, but there was a predatory gleam in his eyes that belied his gentle voice. He dismissed his servitors with a flick of his cane, and the hunched wretches trundled from the room, muttering in Bine Harik. Varamis fiddled with the sleeve of his coat, crossed his legs and then uncrossed them, trying not to meet the doctor's eye. Morfran gaped at him with a vacant expression, slack-jawed and breathing deeply.
You must be a good friend. Kolchev has requested no other visitors. He never requests anything.
He crushed a fly with his forefinger, smearing it across the table.
Apart from death.
Varamis shuffled uncomfortably in his seat.
We were good friends, before the incident. But he made no attempt to contact me, before this I mean. I have no idea what he wants.
Morfran's head remained rolled back on his shoulders. His mouth still hung open.
You were prepared to pay handsomely. To see him.
Varamis glanced in Morfran's direction, but lacked the courage to actually scowl at him.
You refused me access, even though you say Kolchev requested it. What else could I do? Whatever has become of him, he is still my friend.
Morfran remained supine.
The father has been quite clear. Kolchev receives no visitors. Kept alive, but nothing else. No reversion therapy. No spiritual realignment, no corrective surgery or neural reprogramming, no admirers to be admitted into his presence. But the amount you were willing to pay, it made me realize that an exception had to be made. He's clearly important to you. You must be more than just an admirer of his music.
Varamis did not like the way Morfran was studying him. He tried to assume what he hoped was a sane expression. But the more he thought about his facial muscles, the less cooperative they became. He massaged his jaw and left his hand hovering over his disobedient mouth.
I was his student at the Galatia Academy. We became good friends. But I hadn't seen him for months when I heard that he had...
Varamis glanced back at the door. Morfran licked his lips.
Set himself alight? Made a mess of himself? I have seen it many times before. We didn't expect him to survive.
Varamis grimaced and shook his head. Morfran rose with such languor that he seemed to float from his chair.
Let me take you to him. Keep it brief, though. Conversation is a stimulant, despite the sedatives.
The doctor led Varamis down a tall, narrow corridor lined with doorways and piles of broken cogitators. The strip lumens running overhead burned with such a fierce, white glare that the walls seemed to glow, giving the whole place a dreamlike quality. Paint was peeling from the plasteel doors, and the walls were a mosaic of brown stains. There were slogans carved into the cornices. A broad mind, lax focus. Contemplation is the womb of treachery and other encouraging messages. Robed attendants bustled past, pushing empty gurneys or carrying metal trays full of syringes, and there was a distant sound, like a half-heard tide, that Varamis finally recognized as the muffled chatter of voices, talking urgently behind locked doors.
The sanatorium is built in the shape of the Imperial Aquila,
said Morfran, waving his cane proudly down the corridor.
This wing houses the females, nearly half a mile long, 12 floors above, and 5 below. Each floor makes a row of the eagle's feathers. The head houses the chapels, administratum offices, dormitories, etc. The other wing houses the males, including your friend, the maestro.
As they moved deeper into the sanatorium, the voices grew in volume and Varamis had the unnerving feeling that the patients were aware of his arrival and demanding his attention. Morfran caught his pained expression.
Don't be afraid. They have no interest in us. They are at war with their minds. Beyond help, most of them.
Beyond help? Then why perform the treatments?
Because they are too wealthy to die. They must suffer for their elevated position. Their families cannot bear to let them go, so they pay me to shackle their bodies and pickle their minds.
So what do you do for them?
Everything I can. And we have some successes. I said most of them are beyond help. We are constantly developing better, more vigorous methods. Our work is as much spiritual as physical or psychological. Weakness of mind is weakness of spirit. Madness stems from deviance, lack of faith. They must learn to fear. Fear of the immortal emperor. Then they can begin to love him. And in that love, they might find their sanity. It is a hard road, but I walk it with them.
Varamis was not convinced that madness stemmed from a lack of faith. He was about to argue. But then he considered how easily he could find himself on the other side of the locked doors. Morfran did not look like a man who would enjoy debating the efficacy of his methods. It took nearly an hour to reach the ward containing Kolchev, and the clamor of voices had almost driven Varamis to distraction when Morfran stopped beside a door and waved for a servitor to unlock it. The cell was in darkness, and Morfran sighed, waving the servitor inside. A glow globe rattled into life, splashing the room with cheerless light, and Varamis backed away, shaking his head and pulling at his sleeves. Kolchev was suspended in the center of the room by an anti-grav field. There was a generator humming somewhere as he rotated slowly, a few feet above the floor.
What are you doing to him?
Whispered Varamis. Kolchev was cocooned in cables and chains. Every inch of him was bound. His face was visible, but the skin and hair had been burned away, and Kolchev's head looked like a glossy crimson skull. The ends of the cables were sewn into his skin, snaking under the surface like enlarged veins. They were crackling and humming, pouring electricity into Kolchev's muscles so that he twitched and jerked constantly, as though performing an absurd dance. There was a faint aroma of cooking meat coming from him. He was staring at the ceiling, tears pouring down his ruined face as he mouthed silent prayers.
I am nurturing his faith,
replied Dr. Morfran. Morfran ambled into the room and tapped at a rune board in the wall. The sound of the generator faded, and Kolchev slumped in his bonds as the electricity left his body. Then Morfran took a syringe from a table and punched it into Kolchev's thigh. Kolchev's eyes cleared, and he looked around in confusion.
You have an hour,
said Morfran, leaving the room. He paused in the doorway, leaning close to Varamis.
Don't get within arm's reach. His mind is in tatters.
Then he left, slamming the door closed behind him. For a moment, Varamis forgot about Kolchev as panic filled him. He was locked in a cell in the Morfran sanatorium. What if Morfran never came back? What if the doctor forgot about him? Or decided he was not fit to leave?
Varamis?
Kolchev's voice was a whisper. Varamis turned back to his friend. He could think of nothing to say. No way to begin a conversation with such a ruin. Kolchev tried to speak, but the words snagged in his throat. He nodded to a table near the door with a jug of water and some cups. Varamis filled a cup, then hesitated, remembering Morfran's warning. Kolchev's eyes were wide with desperation, but Varamis could see no trace of violence. Besides, he had not come all this way to such a wretched place just to watch Kolchev gasp. Kolchev was still floating a few feet in the air, so Varamis moved the table closer, stood on it, and pressed the cup to Kolchev's lips. He drank slowly, spilling as much as he swallowed. Then he nodded, and Varamis backed away.
My friend,
said Varamis.
it is dreadful to see you like this. Perhaps there is some way I could talk to your father about having you moved. This is not right. Whatever you have done, it's appalling. It is not right that you should be—
No!
Kolchev spoke with surprising force. He stared at Varamis, his eyes shining from his blistered face.
I must stay here. I am not safe. You don't understand. You must do what I ask, and then you must find a way to kill me.
Kill you?
Yes, but not yet. First, you must go to Favos' house, and you must burn it down.
Burn down your home? Why would you wish me to do something like that?
Varamis saw that Dr. Morfran was right. His friend had no grasp on reality. He was raving.
I cannot do such a thing, Johann. You must know that. Favos' house belongs to your family. I could not set fire to it. Imagine what your—
Burn it!
cried Kolchev, starting to struggle violently against his bonds. Blood bubbled from the stitches, holding the cables in his flesh.
You have to!
Of course,
said Varamis in soothing tones.
Whatever you wish, Johann. I will burn Favos down. You need not worry about it anymore.
Kolchev bucked and thrashed, even more furious.
Do not lie! I'm no fool!
He halted his movements and glared at Varamis again.
And neither am I insane. Whatever Morfran has told you, I am sane, Varamis. Dear throne, how I wish I were not.
He let out such a dreadful animal cry of grief that Varamis wanted to hug him, but he was growing more sure that Dr. Morfran was right. His friend was utterly deranged.
Listen,
said Kolchev, lowering his voice.
I called you here because only you will understand how I could have done the things I did. You are my last hope, Varamis. If you will not hear me, then that thing will go undiscovered, and someone else will find it, and the whole cycle will begin again. You must listen. By all that we have shared, by all that we mean to each other, I beg you, listen to me and believe what I say.
Of course, old friend. I will listen, gladly.
You are still trying to humor me, but once I have finished, I think you will understand. Do you remember that night at the Valgast Theatre, the first performance of Zelter's Threnody?
Kolchev's conversation followed no logical progression, but Varamis was keen not to upset his friend again, so he played along.
Yes, I do remember. We were there with Countess Uressa and her brothers. It was the premiere.
He paused and smiled.
It was incredible, actually. I wept at the beauty of it.
Kolchev looked pained.
Then you will understand. That night was the beginning of the end, Varamis. I knew it was coming, but that night it all came crashing down on me. I had felt for months that I was approaching a chasm. Nothing I composed was worth the paper it was written on.
Not true,
exclaimed Varamis. This was an argument they had had many times.
You are one of the finest composers of this generation.
I am mediocre.
Kolchev spat the word.
Vaccheia, Nerulum, Demetrius, all of the new composers have surpassed my feeble attempts, and now I am old. I have been a fool, Varamis, wasting my life in pursuit of an impossible ideal. I will never equal those great artists. I knew it long ago, but that night, when I watched Zelter conducting his Threnody, I finally fell into the abyss. I could bear it no longer.
Varamis nodded.
I remember you left without saying goodbye, or speaking to Zelter.
Speaking to him? How could I have spoken to the man who had just proven my worthlessness? I fled the theatre and roamed the slums, drowning my sorrows in whatever drinking dens I could find.
Those places are not safe for a gentleman, Johann. You should have let me escort you back to Favos' house.
Not safe?
Kolchev laughed bitterly.
No, they are not safe.
He looked around the filthy cell.
Nowhere is.
So what happened to you that night? Was that the night of the fire? No, it can't have been. I heard of the fire as soon as it happened, and that was weeks after Zelta's Threnody.
There was no fire that night. I drank and I drank until I was almost blind with it, stumbling through the ruins and hab blocks. It's a miracle I wasn't murdered.
He laughed again.
No, a tragedy I wasn't murdered. Before I did the things
His words trailed off and he stared at the floor.
What happened?
Asked Varamis. Kolchev still seemed deluded, but there was something oddly compelling about his tale. He was talking with such conviction, such dread.
I found myself back near the academies, back amongst the inspired youths who drove me to such despair. And then I saw him, Zelta, still outside the theater, his face full of youth and pride, as he regaled his adoring public with his wit. I could hear him, talking of how easy he found the process of writing music. I could not bear to face him, to tell him how perfect his Threnody was, so I ducked into Arvad's and hid.
Arvad's?
The shop. I would not usually set foot in the place. Arvad is a crook. Not one of his instruments is worthy of a respectable musician.
Kolchev hesitated.
But he was not there. Arvad was not in the shop. It was another man.
He groaned and strained against his bonds.
And I knew, Varamis. As soon as I saw that man, I knew there was something wrong. Why did I stay? If I had left then, I could have remained a tragic failure instead of this thing I have become. He smiled at me, as though he were a normal man, but when I looked into his eyes...
Kolchev seemed unable to continue. Engrossed, Varamis hurried over with another drink. Kolchev nodded his thanks. When he was calm again, he continued.
His eyes were too vivid, the colors too rich. I cannot explain it, but his face was a mask, a lie. I don't know what he was.
He took a moment to compose himself.
I was about to leave. Even Zelta's crowing was preferable to spending another minute with that peculiar man. My heart was racing and my stomach was so gripped with nausea, I thought I might be sick.
But you were drunk,
said Varamis. Something about Kolchev's tone was unnerving him even more than the asylum. He felt a sudden need to explain away the strangeness.
It would have been the wine that made you so ill. And that's probably why the man seemed so odd to you.
No,
snapped Kolchev.
No,
he repeated in a quieter voice.
He was like a figment of a dream that had dislocated itself from my mind.
So did you leave?
I tried, Varamis, but I think my fate was sealed before I entered the place. As I approached the door, I saw the most beautiful instrument I had ever seen, a 6-stringed dulcimer, small and fretted and made entirely of silver, its body curved like a serpent and filigreed with intricate designs. I had never seen anything like it. It seemed to call out to me. I actually salivated as I touched it. I was like a famished man presented with a feast. And then, the strangest thing. Paying no heed to the stranger behind me, I started to play it. Oh, Varamis, if you could have heard the music that spilled from those strings. Even in such a stupor, I managed to create a melody with more wit and insight than anything I had achieved before.
He shook his head.
I told the shopkeeper I wanted to buy it, and he named some absurd price, a fraction of the thing's value. I wanted to recoil from him. He was toying with me, playing a game beyond my comprehension. He smiled kindly, but his eyes were like a void.
So you left without it?
No, Varamis. I bought it. I paid the man his ridiculous price and rushed from the shop, scurrying like a criminal lest Zelta saw me. And then, when I finally returned to Favos' house, I cradled the dulcimer like a babe in my arms and slept.
But the fire, Johann, these terrible injuries, how did it happen?
If only my scars were the extent of it. You have no idea, Varamis. The next morning I awoke, and without even eating, I began to play the dulcimer. Drunk, I had made a beautiful sound. Sober, I began to compose pieces of such subtlety and originality that I could not believe they had originated in my own mind. It was as if the Emperor's light had pierced my soul and illuminated my poor excuse for a mind.
He paused for a moment, lost in the memory.
Days went by, and I almost starved. Working tirelessly and forgetting to dress or wash, I grew terrified that someone might try to take the dulcimer away from me. I agonized over the meager price I had paid and wondered why I had not insisted in paying the shopkeeper more. I was sure that he would arrive at my gates and demand I return it. I even dismissed my servants for fear that they would hear the instrument, discern its value, and rob me. I slept every night with it in my arms and began work every morning, filling my house with mountains of notation. Eventually, even though I was alone, I began working in the cellars, in a chamber known only to me. And there I sat, in the darkness and the damp, performing works of genius to an audience of rats.
Varamis was reminded of his days as a student when Kolchev would rhapsodize about the greatest works of imperial music. He pictured himself in Kolchev's cellar, seated among the rats, listening to music so wonderful, it was divine.
But what did you do with the music? What use was it if no one heard it?
You are right, of course. Like any artist, I craved recognition. I could find only so much satisfaction in entertaining myself. As the days wore on and I hunched in the darkness, filling the shadows with my symphony, I realized that I had to play the piece to someone. And it had to be someone who could understand its magnificence. It had to be Zelter. I finished the piece and sent one of my servitors to him with a message. Then I washed and forced myself to eat. I had lost all interest in the needs of the flesh, but I was determined to present myself with some dignity, rather than fainting of exhaustion before I managed to play a note. Zelter accepted my invitation, and 3 days later I welcomed him into Favis's great entrance hall. I could see he was unnerved by my appearance. I had done what I could to make myself presentable, but I was emaciated. Also, the absence of servants or any human beings apart from myself must have struck him as odd, but he masked his doubts and greeted me with a veneer of calm and delightful manners. He flattered me, pretending to admire my work, and for once the lies did not hurt, for I knew I was close to showing him what I was truly capable of. I savored the moment, serving him wine and a meal I had prepared with my own hands, and chatting idly as though it were a normal occasion. He watched me closely, no doubt sensing my excitement and trying to guess why he had been invited to this peculiar house. When I finally mentioned that I would like to perform a new piece for him, Zelter did not quite manage to hide his amusement. It was just a flicker around his mouth, but I knew he was laughing at me, and I reveled in it, delighting in the thought of what he would say when he heard my composition. I had taken the dulcimer out of the cellar and placed it in my recital chamber. I ushered Zelter to a seat and walked over to the gleaming instrument. After hours of entertaining my guest, I was slightly drunk. But it did not matter. I had rehearsed the piece so many times and in so many states of intoxication that I knew I could play it with ease. The truth was that, like all great pieces, it was incredibly simple, the chords seeming so obvious that one imagined it must be an ancient, well-loved melody, but I had scoured every recording and assured myself that it was new. As I played, the music consumed me to such an extent that, when I had finished, it took me a moment to remember I was not alone. I backed away from the dulcimer and steadied my nerves with another glass of wine. For a moment I was too afraid to look at Zelter. What if he was unimpressed? What if I had imagined my genius? What if the tune's inspired simplicity was actually infantile crudeness? A slow hand clap echoed round the recital chamber. Zelter had risen to his feet and was staring at me in shock as he applauded. "My dear Johann," he had said, And for several moments he could say nothing else. Even when he asked me if the piece was really my own, I felt no sense of wounded pride, only a delight in his dazed expression and the tears glinting in his eyes. I have never felt such joy, Varamis. Nothing has ever made me feel so alive as watching Zelta trying to fathom how such beauty was possible. I was so exultant that when Zelta asked to examine the dulcimer, I managed to quell my feelings of jealousy and panic. He stroked the designs on the silver body, mouthing silent phrases, and I knew he was still hearing my music in his mind, still trying to unravel the hidden complexities. He gripped my shoulder and admitted that he had not realized the depth of my talents. I felt as though I were airborne as I crossed the chamber to fetch another bottle of wine. I saw how wrong I had been to hide my genius in the cellars of Favos' house. I needed to perform, and it had to be in the Valgas Theatre, where Zelta had played his Threnody. I would show the world that I had achieved greatness. I was so consumed by my imagined future that I barely registered Zelta's request to play the dulcimer.
Kolchev paused and strained against his bonds again, staring at Varamis. He seemed unsure how to continue.
And did he play?
Asked Varamis, sensing that the tale was about to take a darker turn. His pulse was hammering in his temples as he waited for Kolchev to continue.
He played.
Kolchev sounded desolate.
And what?
Demanded Varamis.
And the Emperor spoke directly into my heart. It was not music that emerged from the dulcimer, but life itself in all its terror and glory. I slumped back against the wall as the chords filled my head and knotted my stomach. Where my piece had been pretty and charming, Zelta's was like an apocalypse, like divine judgment. It was exquisite and terrifying. It made my composition seem like a nursery rhyme, or worse, a pastiche of true art. And when he finished, Zelta gave a casual shrug and told me his piece was unfinished, that I was the first to hear it.
Kolchev began thrashing against his restraints again, spitting and grunting as he tried to free himself. It took Varamis several moments to calm him again and convince him to continue.
The first crime was mine,
said Kolchev when he was able to speak.
I will not lay the blame elsewhere. I was drunk and half-starved, and I had not been in human company for weeks. But I must own what I did. Although I never intended it to end as it did, I shoved Zelta aside and snatched the dulcimer, howling and weeping, tormented by a feeling of betrayal. I had thought the instrument and I shared a bond, that I alone could work such wonders through it. As Zelta raced after me, apologizing, I took the dulcimer to the top of the stairs and hurled it down the steps. To my horror, Zelta leapt to catch it, and he fell, hurtling down the spiral stairs.
Kolchev took a deep breath.
I rushed after him, calling out in alarm, but Throne saved me. He had tumbled to the very bottom of the tower. I knew before I reached him that he was dead. His head was bent back at a grotesque angle. But even in my grief, my repulsive soul rejoiced to see that he had the dulcimer in his arms. It was covered in his blood, but he had saved it. It was then that I realized I was no longer in control of my actions. You must believe this, Varamis. You are my only hope of ever being understood. I know I will die in here, disgraced and then forgotten. But I cannot bear the thought that no one knows what really happened. I dragged Zelta and the dulcimer back down into the hidden cellar and wept at my crime. But then I felt an external force, willing me to act, willing me to play the cursed thing again. As I picked it up, I saw to my amazement that Zelta's blood had vanished. I peered at it, wondering if the blood could have been wiped off, but it was impossible. There was no trace. It was as gleaming and immaculate as the day I first saw it. It was then I realized the instrument was not of this world, not of any world. Even as my doubts grew, I could not resist the urge to play it. So, with my audience now bolstered by a still warm corpse, I began to play. To my surprise, a new piece tumbled from the dulcimer. Rather than the elegant ditty I had played before, this was a thing of majesty and power, far surpassing my first attempt. And then, with a ghoulish laugh, I realized that I was playing Zelter's composition, the work of such magnificence that it had sent me into paroxysms of rage.
How?
demanded Varamis.
Was it an old piece? Had you studied the sheet music?
No, it was entirely new. Zelter had never performed it in public. I believed what he had said about playing it just for me. But somehow, after just that one listen, I was able to recreate it in all its splendor. I do not know how long I played that glorious music, ignoring the body bleeding at my side, lost in the enchantment of those notes. I stopped only to drink more wine, and the drunker I became, the more wonderful the music sounded. And then, as I played, I began to realize what had happened. Zelter's death had created some kind of union with the dulcimer. Along with his blood, it had drunk his essence, his genius, and passed it on to me. It was a vampire, but a vampire of creativity. If you listen to Dr. Morfran, he will tell you that this was when I truly lost my mind. But I swear to you, Varamis, what I did next was not of my own volition.
Varamis was troubled by the image of Zelter's death, and he was scouring his memory for a time that the young composer had been seen in the academies since he premiered his Threnody. He could think of none.
What did you do next?
He asked.
I changed,
answered Kolchev.
I became something other than a man. I see your doubt, Varamis, but I know that the dulcimer changed me. It was acting through me. It was the dulcimer that then sent the message to Demetrius, requesting that he visit me and play me his latest piece.
Varamis shook his head.
You didn't. I will not believe it.
I did, and you must believe it.
And once he had played?
There was another fall, another death.
You pushed him?
Kolchev would not answer.
But 2 deaths, Kolchev. Do you expect me to believe they would go unnoticed?
I am no fool. I chose Demetrius not just for his genius. He was a loner, even more so than I was. Months would go by before he was missed. But still, I knew it was only a matter of time before I was discovered.
Varamis began pacing around the room.
So that was the reason for the fire, to cover your tracks, to make sure no bodies would be found.
In part, but it was more than that. As I played Demetrius's masterpiece note for note, knowing that it was now mine, I could already feel a hunger growing in me, a hunger for more. That cursed instrument had me in its grasp. It was insatiable. It was going to demand that I feed it again. I had to destroy it. I threw it in a corner of the cellar with the 2 corpses, drenched them in oil, and set it alight. But the damn thing resisted. The flames would not hold. They leapt from the metal and latched onto me. They looked like dazzling serpents, snatching at my face. The corpses went up like torches, but the dulcimer was immune, gleaming and impervious. As the cellar filled with flames, I battled to reach it, but the heat forced me back to the stairs. When my father's servants arrived, I begged them to burn the rest of the house down, but they would not listen.
Varamis looked at his friend's blistered face, imagining the scene. Kolchev, convinced that his lunacy stemmed from a dulcimer, battling the flames as his victims burned. It was dreadful, all the more so because he was starting to believe that Kolchev really had killed those poor men. His obsession with perfection and greatness had driven him utterly insane. It was even more of a tragedy than he had anticipated. Rather than one life being ruined, he now suspected that the world had been robbed of 3 great musical geniuses.
You have to go there for me,
said Kolchev.
I can never leave this place, but you could go to the house and enter the cellars. I can tell you the route to the hidden chamber. Find it, Varamis, and destroy it. The thing is utterly evil. If you do not destroy it, there will be other fools like me, willing to do its grisly bidding.
Varamis shook his head.
I cannot burn down your ancestral home, Kolchev. You do not want me to deceive you, so I won't. I will not be able to do what you're asking.
Kolchev howled and struggled, letting out a bestial keening sound.
Wait!
Cried Varamis. His time was almost up, and he could not bear to leave his friend like this. He doubted they would ever meet again.
Wait!
He repeated.
Listen!
Kolchev took a long time to calm himself, but finally managed to look down at Varamis.
I can't do what you ask, but I will make you a promise,
said Varamis.
I will go to Favos' house and find the cellar you described. And if the dulcimer is there, as you claim, I will have it destroyed.
Kolchev was shivering and twitching, almost as much as when the electric was passing through his veins, but he managed to answer.
You swear it?
I swear it. If the thought of that instrument is causing you such torment, I will destroy it. Whatever alloy it is made of, there will be a furnace hot enough to melt it.
Kolchev continued twitching and staring wildly at Varamis, then slumped in his bonds with a sigh. He closed his eyes and let his head rock back on his shoulders.
You swear?
I swear.
That same day, Varamis traveled 5 miles east of Zeradra city towards Favos' house. He had to duck as freight haulers roared overhead, so hazed by smog that they looked like phantoms slicing through the gloom. He felt like a criminal, though he could not say exactly why. He had approached Favos' house from the rear, leaving his ground car half a mile away and clambering down the landslide of prehistoric ruins that loomed over the Kolchev estate. Like most of Terra's great houses, Favos was surrounded on all sides by centuries of accumulated rubble and detritus. Mountainous edifices so worn by time and war that they looked more like geology than architecture. Varamis had to hurry through several shanty towns before he reached the remains of Favos' outer walls. He clambered into the courtyard and made for one of the servants' entrances. He had never approached the house from this direction, and his sense of unease grew. He wished he could head back to the city and forget his promise to Kolchev, but he knew he could not. Everything good in his life had stemmed from the old man's patient tutelage. Varamis's career as a musician would have never begun if Kolchev had not seen a spark of talent in him. He owed the old man this one last favor. The door was locked, but Kolchev had told Varamis all the security codes, and he tapped the rune board quickly, scurrying inside before he was seen. There was no power in the house, and the glow globes that lined the walls remained dark. Varamis pulled some shutters open, spilling one light into the servants' dining room. Everything was thick with dust, and rats scattered at his approach. He hurried on, down a long corridor, into areas of the house he recalled from Kolchev's recitals. He found the stairs to the cellars at the back of the kitchens and lifted the hatch. The smell of charred wood rushed up to greet him. Varamis hesitated, peering down the worn steps, picturing faces in the darkness. Demetrius and Zelta, drenched in blood as Kolchev played music over their corpses. He took out a lumen and flicked it on, spilling light down the steps. His fear grew so great that he wondered if he might have to give up. But his promise filled him with resolve, and he climbed down the steps. As he reached the bottom, something rushed towards him from the shadows. Varamis howled, pointing his lumen at the shape. It was paper, just a few sheets, covered in musical notation. They had been disturbed by the draft, Varamis admitted when he opened the hatch. He cursed himself and pressed on, passing through the cellars until he reached the hidden door that Kolchev had described. The incident with the paper had made him see how foolish he was being. What was there down here that could harm him? He shoved the door open, and the smell of burning increased. Smoke still lingered in the air, and he coughed a few times as the acrid smell hit the back of his throat. It did not take him long to find the two bodies. Part of him had hoped, that Kolchev's delusions were so profound that he had imagined the deaths. But he could recognize the remnants of Zelta's burned clothes, so he assumed the other body must be Demetrius. He had seen dead bodies before, but never of his friends. He stared at the blackened shapes for a long time, too saddened to continue. The thought of helping Kolchev with one last good deed had felt like a glimmer of light. But now, seeing the bodies, he felt like he was partaking in some vile conspiracy. He would have to contact the men's families and make sure they at least knew what had happened in this tragic place. As he cast his light over the bodies, it glinted on a silver frame. Like the bodies, Varamis had half hoped not to find the dulcimer, but there it was, resting on a mound of ashes, glinting merrily in the darkness. It occurred to him that, once the deaths were revealed, the instrument would most likely be taken away as evidence. He would lose his chance to fulfill his promise of destroying it, unless he did that first.
I will come back for you,
he whispered to the corpses, unnerved by the sound of his own voice.
Once this thing is melted, I promise you.
He stepped past the bodies and grabbed the dulcimer, surprised by how heavy it felt. Then he headed back through the cellars and up the stairs. As he re-entered the kitchens, the increased light revealed that Kolchev had been right in one respect, at least. The thing was beautiful. Varamis placed it on a table and ran his fingers over the engravings. As his fingers brushed against the strings, a chord rang out, echoing around the house. The sound was bright and clear. He strummed it again, fretting a different chord, and in a wonderful rush, he thought of a whole progression that could follow the first two chords. He had never composed in his life, but as he played the dulcimer, he realized that he had stumbled across something wonderful and unique. He sat down in a chair and began to play in earnest, an entire symphony forming in his head. Minutes bled into hours, and Varamis remained hunched over the dulcimer, his face rigid with concentration. After a long time, he started to smile.